Hello Internet, Seth Skorikowski, and welcome to part 3 of our overview/review/how-to on Kult Divinity Lost. In the last episode, we created our character, Jack Morton. Today we're going to cover some of the basic game mechanics, essentially how do we play this thing. Now, I won't be covering combat or stability in this episode. Yes, they are mechanics, and yes, they're very important mechanics, but there's just so much more to them that I think they deserve a more dedicated video just on those topics. Kult is played through what's called moves, and the first of those is player moves. Player moves are performed when a character attempts an action that has consequence for failure. Now, this might be instigated by the player, such as they attempt to smooth talk their way past a doorman, or it could be in response to some sort of outside factors, such as diving out of the way of a runaway car. Now, outside of particular character advantages, because most of the advantages are their own moves, but a player has to choose what their advantages are, outside of those, there are 11 basic player moves that every character has, which you can see 10 of them on the character sheet, one under each of the attributes: investigate, observe a situation, read a person, act under pressure, etc. The 11th basic move is helping or hindering, when a character is attempting to assist or hinder another player character. How we perform a player move is a player rolls 2d10, and they add the related attribute, which might be a plus or a minus, depending on what that attribute is, any modifiers that the game master states, and then they just total up the result. If that comes to 15 or more, the roll is a total success. It goes exactly the way the player wanted it to. 10 to 14 is considered a success with complications, meaning that they either succeeded but with some sort of cost, or they only partially succeeded in what it was they were trying to do. Or if the player rolls 9 or less, they failed, and likely have some pretty serious negative consequences for that failure. Or a game master might just choose that, yes, they did succeed at that task, whatever it was, but now we're going to have even greater consequences for failure, meaning that the game master can make an additional move of their own, kind of as a response to that character failing the roll, but allowing them to have a success. The game master is going to get more moves to make up for that. Now, for those of you like me who are not mathematically inclined, the probabilities for each tier are 21% for total success, 43% for partial success, and 36% for total failure. And that's just strictly going by the rolling of the dice, the 2d10. Modifiers for character ability are going to make a huge impact on those results, but strictly going by the dice, that's what they are. Now, regardless, good or bad, the result of a player move should always push the narrative forward. Which means if there's not a significant consequence for failure, then the game master shouldn't even call for a roll at all. For example, let's say that I gotta pick a lock, right? But, somebody could happen by, I could get spotted, and I could get in trouble for that. So yeah, the game master should make me roll and act under pressure, just to show that I can keep my cool and manage to get this door open and inside without anybody seeing me or getting caught, right? But if I'm out in the middle of nowhere and there ain't nobody near me and ain't nobody gonna see me and no significant consequence if I can't unlock this door, then the game master shouldn't even call for a roll at all. They should just let me succeed at that task and allow the narrative to keep moving forward. Some of the skills are pretty self-explanatory. Reading a person is clearly for when a player is trying to gauge how an NPC feels or determine if they're being truthful or maybe reveal what it is that NPC wants, what's motivating the NPC. Other skills, though, they can be a little bit trickier. For example, assassinating someone with a sniper rifle if you're up in a sniper's nest or executing a defenseless opponent, one might initially assume that would be engage in combat because that's based on their violent attribute. However, it's more likely going to be act under pressure, which is based off of their cool attribute. Act under pressure is a very broad move. It covers a lot of different things. The core book gives us several examples of what it might be used for, such as executing a defenseless opponent, administering first aid, hiding, chasing, fleeing, or even lying. Which lying is something that people usually associate with charisma instead of cool. However, charisma, that's what we use for an influencing others move, which is when a player character is trying to manipulate another character into doing something for them. Now, personally, I think that this creates a little bit of wiggle room here where a player might be able to argue and defend why they should be allowed to use an influencing others instead of an act under pressure if they can defend what it is that they're trying to manipulate the NPC into doing for them. Or maybe they can successfully argue why, yeah, it is an act under pressure, but they should use this based off the charisma attribute rather than their cool attribute because the charisma is going to be more helpful for this. Now, of course, the game master, they get final say on this. It's completely up to the discretion of how they want to do it, right? But with a narrative-based game like Kult, the spirit of the rules is far more important than the letter of the rules. Other skills allow a player to choose from a list of options of what it is they want to do when they make that move, such as observe a situation, which is a perception roll, allows the player to ask questions, such as what poses the biggest threat? What can I use to my advantage? If a character uses the information they gained from any of these questions, they get a +1 to any associated roll whenever they use those. Now, our character Jack, because he has the instinct advantage, gains him a +2 to any rolls when he's using information from an observe the situation check. Observe a situation is a critically important skill for player characters to have, and characters that find themselves in a difficult situation should make it a habit of stopping and looking around because whatever it is that they see could help them overcome the situation that they're now in. Now, for our group, we also say that if that character can then communicate to the rest of the party what it was that they saw, then if anybody uses that information, they also get the plus applied to that roll. Such as a player character goes, hey, grab that pole right there and use it against that monster. And if another player character grabs that pole and uses it against the monster, they're going to get a plus to that roll because they observed the situation found that. Or let's say they're in a high-speed chase, right? And you got one character who's driving a car and he's trying to get away from some bad guys. And the other character, they're in the passenger seat, they're acting as navigator, they make their observe the situation, and all of a sudden they're like, hey, take that turn right there, that's the best way that we can get through this. And if the driver, they take that turn, they're going to get a plus to that roll to get away. However, with moves that give a list of questions that the player can ask any question that they want, really. They don't have to be restricted to only what is on this list. But players don't narrow this down too much as far as what it is you're asking. Try to keep the questions pretty broad as far as what you're looking for. For example, when we first started playing Kult, one of my players who is just notorious for not coming out and saying what it is he wants, he was trying to observe a house that they were wanting to break into. But instead of asking the questions, what's my best way through this? Or what can I use to my advantage? Or what's my biggest threat here? He started asking very specific questions about what the roof was made out of and how steep it was, but not really saying what it was he was going for, what it was he was asking about specifically, why he was asking about the roof. So game masters, you should try to push your players into not over-limiting themselves whenever they're asking questions. Answer them in the broadest sense. Something that's more like you're answering one of the suggested questions if what they're asking can kind of fall into that. Now, for that example I was giving when I had the player that was asking about the roof, I answered the very specific questions about the roof. And then, once they were done, I then told the player that neither of those questions counted toward the 2 questions that you're allowed to ask. So check out this list and you can ask 2 of those, because I didn't think that any information that he was getting about the roof would have even counted towards those 2 questions, because he was just kind of asking about what it was he saw about the roof. Now, the only player move that I do have some complaints about is helping or hindering. And this is when a player character is trying to influence another PC's chance of success, such as a player is trying to do a roll for act under pressure to scale a wall, and another player rolls their own cool stat to assist them in that. I really do dig the idea of them, but how it works, the effect is only a +1 if they make a 10 to 14, or a +2 if they make a 15 or more. A total success is just a +2, and I don't really feel that that's enough to warrant that other person trying to help them out. Because if a character fails that roll, let's say their initial results on that roll, let's say it was going to be a 6, and that's a total failure, but their buddy's trying to help them out, and that gives them a +2, then that's going to modify their roll to an 8, which is still a total failure, meaning that everything failed, even though one of those characters had a total success. So personally, I feel that those values should at least double, doing a +2 and then a +4, or maybe be where it's like a certain plus for the mid-tier, and if you get a total success, maybe it automatically raises them one full success level, such as it goes from total failure, guaranteed that it's going to go up to partial success. If it's partial success, it's going to guarantee that they go up to total success. The Kult website offers us a cheat sheet with condensed explanations for all the player moves. There is a little bit more to this in the book, but they were able to fit everything down on one piece of paper, just front and back, and I find it extremely helpful. So I recommend that everybody that plays this game just go ahead and have a single front and back page printed out with everything on it. It has been a lifesaver for us, so link below, definitely get that. The next kind of move is Game Master moves, and these are obstacles or consequences that the characters are to overcome. Now this could be to increase the tension to a certain scene or to a certain story. Maybe it can be in response to a player's move, such as a player rolls really low on an action, and the result says that the Game Master may make a move as a cost. These come in two forms: hard moves and soft moves. Soft moves are when the character has the opportunity to avoid consequences, such as the creature is lunging out of the darkness, and the character, they might be able to dodge or kill this creature or run away from the creature. It doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to be successfully attacked by the creature. Hard moves have consequences baked into them, such as the monster jumps out of the darkness and hits you. Now these are usually the result of a failed roll from the player, such as a serious injury might be a response to a character to failing their endure injury roll, or a character is knocked unconscious due to a bad roll, and the Game Master makes a move, and now the player wakes up in some cell captured somewhere, and now they're going to have to figure out how to get out of this new situation. Hard moves, while necessary, should be used very sparingly, usually as the consequence for a player character failing to stop or avoid a soft move. Essentially a soft move is the promise that bad things are going to happen unless the player characters manage to stop or avoid them. A hard move is the fulfillment of that promise. The core book offers us an assortment of Game Master move suggestions, each with several examples under each as a way that they can be used and employed by GMs. I find their examples very helpful for me because one of the hardest parts that I've had when it comes to Game Master moves is just keeping those moves varied and not falling into a pattern of a player fails a specific roll and then all of a sudden, I come back with some sort of predictable result happening because I'm overusing some particular Game Master move as a response. So I really like that they have all those examples there because it helps me as a GM kind of keep what it is I do varied, and it's not as predictable for the players to see. Game Master moves usually aren't set, so when determining what move to make, a Game Master's loyalty is more toward the narrative of the fiction than with the written rules. Held moves. If a player rolls an action and they fail, or sometimes when they partially fail a roll, it says that the Game Master makes a move. Now, with most character disadvantages, the Game Master might be given one or more moves that they can take. However, they don't get to take those moves right away. They can save them for a bit, which is called a hold. An example of this here is with Influence Others. On a partial success, the NPC does what the player character wants, but there may be future complications, or they might regret it later. These are essentially Game Master moves that are on a time delay. Now, Game Masters, they need to remember to use their holds. Otherwise, it negates the cost and all the drama that's happened because we had a bad roll. And when they do that move later on, it needs to be clearly the result of being the result of that bad player roll that happened earlier. But Game Masters don't have to use their moves right away. They can kind of save them up for later for some sort of big twist or big surprise. Now, personally, a house rule that we use at our table is that I allow for certain player moves to do the same thing, where players can take a hold. For example, a player rolls and observe the situation and gets a 15 or more, and they're allowed to ask 2 questions. But the player really only has 1 question that they want to ask, and they might just ask another question because they're supposed to. So in those cases, I allow them to hold on to that second question, and not just for that scene, but for the whole session. They took the risk by making the roll, and they succeeded the roll, so I'm going to let them go ahead and hold on to that last question, that little bit of success for whenever it is that they want to use that later. Relation modifiers. One interesting thing that was brought up in Beyond Darkness and Madness is relation inspiration. Basically, if a character can use their relation as their motivation motivation behind an action, a move, then the relationship value can be added to that roll. An easy example would be protecting the relation from a monster. That might give them a bonus to the character's own attack rolls against this monster, or a bonus if they're trying to stop their relation from bleeding out from some sort of injury. But another example is, let's say a character is buried alive, requiring that they have to make a keep it together roll to keep from panicking here because they're buried alive. But if their relation is in trouble and they need to rescue their relation and get out of here to do that, focusing on how they have to get out of here to save their relation, they can give a bonus to their roll not to panic and just focus themselves up on trying to escape and help their friend. Meaning that if my buddy Mock was in trouble, because he's got a relationship value of 2 with me, any moves that I make in order to save my buddy Mock are going to get a +2 added to my ability to do those because he is that important to me. Now, on the flip side, a character who's attempting to harm a relation must first roll a keep it together with their relationship value as a negative modifier. And on a partial success, the actual attack roll that they make against their relation, where we're going to be trying to harm them, that's going to have a negative modifier equal to the relation's strength. And if we fail that initial keep it together roll, we just can't bring ourselves to attack our relation. Meaning, if I got to hurt my buddy Mock, who I got a 2 relationship with, the first thing I got to do is roll a keep it together just to see how bad this is going to hurt my frame of mind and my stability. Now, if I make the roll, then great, I can proceed as normal. But let's say I get a partial success on that roll. That now means, in addition to any bad stuff that's going to happen to me because I wasn't completely able to keep my cool here, I'm going to have a -2 to my attack roll against my friend here due to my own hesitation to hurt my friend. Now, let's say I fail to keep it together, right? That now means, in addition to all the bad things that can happen to me because I wasn't able to keep my cool here, that now means that I am going to be completely unable to attack Mock, even if he is a direct threat to me. He could be coming at me with some sort of rusty knife, a screwdriver, and I better be holding up my gun going, Mock, please stop, why are you doing this, buddy? Sometimes getting close to people can be a liability. Now, we're going to get a lot more into relations later on when we cover stability in a later episode, but because relations can both help and hinder a character's sanity, it's pretty important there. But as far as when it deals with relations and player moves, relation strength can work as a modifier, which could be good or bad. Now let's look at dramatic hooks. These are personal goals a character wishes to achieve during a game session. So at the start of the first session, they need to choose 2 dramatic hooks for themselves, and these need to be achievable things that they can do in one session. So Jack's character drive, if we're looking at our dark secret, is to find out who is behind these missing buildings and the death of his client. But that's a really large thing to look up. It's too big of a task that we could do in a single session. So we could break this down into milestones, kind of smaller bite-sized chunks as far as how it is he's going to accomplish this larger goal. So to do that, he's first going to visit the location and stake it out and see if anyone's going to go in or out of this building that only he can see. Next, he's going to interview the police officers and first responders who were at the scene of Jennifer Walsh's accident to see if maybe they noticed anything out of the ordinary with that. So these are 2 bite-sized tasks that should hopefully be attainable in a single session. The rulebook suggests that the players use the sentence I will, then finish, reveal, tell, visit, complete, confront, investigate, or develop, and kind of finish that sentence as far as a way to come up with what a good dramatic hook could be, and it gives a call to action to them. Beyond Darkness and Madness offers us even more active verbs to help us out with this and trying to come up with some good dramatic hooks. Now, from my personal experience in playing the game, depending on what the adventure is that we're going to be doing, whatever it is we got planned to do, which the players might not know about this before the session begins, some dramatic hooks might not be that possible to complete, just depending on what the adventure is. Such as, Jack has these plans that he's planning on staking out the apartment and interviewing some witnesses, but the adventure ends up being where it takes place in another city far away, somewhere where it wouldn't even be possible for him to complete either of those hooks this session because that's just not where the adventure was set. So what I suggest here is players come up with your dramatic hooks before the game, figure that out, kind of write them down, whatever it is you want to do. They should certainly be goals that should be explored later on, so they're definitely going to be good dramatic hooks, but I don't really have the players commit to whatever their dramatic hook is until after the session has begun and the players know, where it's going to be and a little bit more about it. That way we can make the dramatic hooks for each session just a little bit more appropriate for the particular session at hand. And dramatic hooks aren't even about completing the plot of the adventure. That's not what they're about at all. They're going to be doing that already, so they don't need to make anything that's about, I am going to find the killer of this mystery adventure that we're doing. No, they're already going to be doing that. These are more about completing the characters' personal stories, kind of their little sideline stories that they're doing where they're kind of exploring and growing up individually. Now, of course, game masters, you should try to give opportunity for dramatic hooks to be completed. You should be really working with them. That way, whatever dramatic hooks they have, you can kind of give them plenty of opportunity where they can do that. Give them a good chance maybe to go back to their home city or anything like that. But realistically, when you've got a group of 3 to 4 players and each of those characters have their own motivations and they have their own 2 dramatic hooks of their own, and the campaign it's kind of going its own direction that we're doing with this group of characters, I have found that it is best just to go ahead and give the setup to the adventure before the players commit to whatever their hooks are, or simply informing them that a particular hook's not going to be possible yet, and the player needs to come up with a different hook, but definitely save that one for later because we're going to be getting back to that. Dramatic hooks have been absolute gold for us when it comes to roleplay, especially when you got situations where one character might be confronting another character over something that character did, or when a character might be confessing some sort of dark secret to them, something that might be able to damage their relationship in the future. It is great. However, you should remember at all times that when you got a group of players that all take it off the Friday nights or the Saturday afternoons or whatever in order to come together and play a game and have some fun, dramatic hooks are meant to enhance the story, mostly individual stories. They should never take priority or overshadow the group story that everybody came here to play. Now, one area that has been challenging for me as a game master is oftentimes the dramatic hooks that my players have are really just moments between player characters, confessions or confrontations, that sort of thing. And those are great. I love those sort of hooks. However, whenever it is that I'm running a game and, I'm used to kind of fast forwarding past the boring parts, the characters, they get into a car and they go to this place that's 2 hours away, and there's nothing that I have planned that they're going to be encountering for that trip along the way. I might give a brief summary and then just kind of fast forward to them arriving, and because we can then get on with the adventure. However, because the characters, they have these dramatic hooks where they're going to be having some conversations between them, I don't want to deny them the opportunity to do this. So I'm not going to just outright say to them, hey, this is a good time for your dramatic hook while you're doing this long drive. But kind of often it ends up like this. Dark clouds race across the sky as you begin the drive to the old estate 100 miles west of the city. Okay. So, anything you guys are doing during the drive? Huh? No, just driving. Okay, well, it takes about 2 hours to get there with all the dark and twisting country roads, but eventually... Wait! About an hour into the drive, I say, Mike, there's something I gotta tell you, but you probably don't want to hear this. What is it, man? Now, I know that this is just my players getting used to it and kind of used to recognizing those opportunities that I'm trying to give them because, at the same time, I'm fighting my own urge just to redline it straight to the destination and get to all the exciting stuff. So when I do try to give those openings and they just stare at me and they're kind of wondering why it is I'm not fast forwarding the scene on because clearly there's nothing else that needs to be done, and I'm kind of quietly waiting for them to come up with the idea of like, oh, we can use our dramatic hook. It's just sometimes it's like pulling teeth. Now, dramatic hooks do not include results. All that matters is that the action was taken by the player character. So if they're supposed to go to a certain location or confront another character with some sort of details, how that plays out and resolves, good or bad, that does not matter at all. The only thing that matters for the completion of a dramatic hook is that an honest attempt was made. Once a dramatic hook has been completed, the character gets 1 experience point. Now, if this is a one-shot adventure where experience advancements don't really matter, game masters might substitute this for 1 point of stability instead. But also, once they've completed one, the character, they need a new dramatic hook to replace it. So, however, instead of choosing one on their own as far as what their new dramatic hook is going to be, the players and the game masters, the rest of the players around the table, they help decide what that character's next dramatic hook should be. Now, the player, of course, they get the final say as if they're going to be doing that or not, but after the first 2 initial dramatic hooks that the player gives themselves for the first session, after that, it becomes a group decision of what their hooks are going to be. In a way, a dramatic hook is a lot like getting a dare from the other players around the table. Sure, the player is agreeing to do it, but that don't necessarily mean that they're looking forward to doing it. Player character might have to do something, like confront their fear of the dark or confess an infidelity to a spouse, and ain't nobody going to be lining up to do those things. However, those are things that create character growth and character drama, and those are a lot of fun to have in our games. So the reason that a dramatic hook is worth a full experience point to complete is that the player has taken on a difficult and unpleasant task. Now let's move on to experience and advancement. We've already showed how completion of a dramatic hook can reward the character an experience point, and we can get up to 2 experience points per session by doing dramatic hooks. And if we have some overachieving player who completes more than 2 of those in a session, I personally say that after the first 2 that they do, which they get experience points for, any more that they might do just gives them a point of stability instead. Now, at the end of each game session, game masters should ask each of their players these 3 questions. Have we discovered anything new about the truth? Have we learned anything new about our character? Have we challenged ourselves? I also ask for each of the players to elaborate on their answer and explain that. If you learned something about the truth, what was it that you learned? If you learned something about your character, what does that mean for your character going forward? Is this going to change how they do anything in the future? So those conversations have actually ended up being really, really helpful in doing a lot of character growth. But for each question that the player answers yes to, and providing that the game master agrees that they agree that the player should have a yes to that, they get 1 experience point. That means that each session between dramatic hooks and these 3 questions, a character can receive up to 5 experience points. And once we have 5 experience points total, we can give our character an advancement. What advancement that is depends on what tier your character is at, sleeper, aware, or enlightened. We have this list. At first, we're going to be limited to just these options. We could raise an active or passive attribute up by 1 to a maximum of 3, or we can raise a single attribute up by 1 to a maximum of +4, or we can select a new advantage from our archetype advantages. Now, notice that each of those has a certain number of boxes next to it, so whichever one the player chooses, they mark a box next to it, and when they run out of boxes, they can't keep choosing that option in the future, they've got to choose another one. Now, after the 5th advancement, meaning they're 6 when or higher, they get a few more options that they could do. Now we can raise a couple more attributes up to +4, or we can choose an advantage from any aware archetype, not just our own. Or even at the cost of one of our 3 original advantages, we can replace our current archetype with another, which basically means we get their 3 starting advantages at the cost of one of our old starting advantages. Now, after 10 advancements, the player can then choose to advance onto an enlightened archetype, keeping their attributes and advantages that they already have, but stepping up into kind of the higher powers as their character is awakening. Okay, well, I think that's it pretty much for basic mechanics for the game. Honestly, the rules are pretty simple to do. It's just a couple pages in the rule book, but they do have a lot of depth to them. There's a lot of layers to them, even though they really don't take up much that time to read, but it does require an incredible amount of game master improvisation to interpret the player roles. That way we can kind of work them towards any sort of thing that they're trying to do, as well as when the game master is doing their own moves, it requires a lot of improvisation, not for it to be predictable or try to keep the game exciting and fun, but I found it really, really rewarding for us, once I got the hang of it, my players have gotten the hang of it, so I really do enjoy the system, but it did have a serious learning curve for us, so hopefully kind of reading that, and there's the free quick start, hopefully between those you can kind of start figuring it out. Now for the next video, we're going to get a little bit more into the crunchy details as we cover combat and damage. Hey, thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, please give it a thumbs up. If you want to see some more of our stuff, such as game reviews, how-tos, or more of this series on Kult Divinity Lost, just hit that subscribe button. If you got any questions or concerns or requests about anything that you want to see in future videos of this series of Kult Divinity Lost, just hit us up in the comments below. Till next time awakened, you have a great day. You brought up before how Kult Divinity Lost is a game for mature players only, but really that was just dealing with, adult subject matter and that sort of thing that a group might have just depending on whatever their group's horror contract is. However, I would argue that the game's mechanics, especially the way that experience points are earned, means that this is a game for mature players only. If you got some sort of munchkin power gamer who's trying to beat the game, and every time they give themselves a dramatic hook, it's like some sort of low-hanging fruit that really shouldn't count for anything, like, oh, I tied my shoe, that's 1 experience point. Or they're just answering yes to every single question at the end of the session, regardless if it's true or not. Like, yes, I learned something about my character. Yes, I challenged myself. Just because they're trying to fast-track themselves to awaken to become gods and beat the game, they are not going to enjoy playing Kult Divinity Lost, and other players are not going to enjoy playing Kult with them. They should just kind of keep themselves to other games, like 12 and up with like hobbits and shit. Yeah, I said it.